Faith had the idea to put all those inmates up there.
She always does that.
All right.
Everyone can have a seat. Did everyone have a good weekend? Key attribute of a good juror is patience. Still beeping.
Should be.
Green light's not on. It's supposed to be on.
Yes.
Any further witnesses on behalf of the state? Little maze you need to navigate. Keep walking. You raise your hand. You solemnly swear, affirm under penalty of perjury, your testimony in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
I do.
Have a seat in a chair and hold yourself up close to the microphone. You may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Would you please state your name for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury?
My name is Officer Seth Penny.
And where are you currently employed?
I work at Minerva Park Police Department
And how long have you been with Minerva Park Police Department?
since mid-2020.
Okay. And before that, were you employed?
As a police officer?
Yes.
Yes, I worked for Mifflin Township and Morrow County Sheriff's Office.
Okay. So was it Mifflin Township first,
Yes, sir.
and then you went to the Sheriff's Department,
Yes,
and then back to, and then to Minerva, correct?
correct.
And is that where you're currently employed now?
Yes.
And what are your duties there at the Minerva Township Police Department?
Minerva Park?
Or Minerva, I'm sorry.
To just do regular patrol.
And is that what your duties were back in 2020?
Yes.
And when you say regular patrol, can you explain, ladies and gentlemen, jury, what does that mean?
That could be anything from, traffic stops, traffic offenses, to responding to calls, anything that a standard basic peace officer would do that's not a part of any specialized units.
Okay, now, back on December 4th, okay, of 2020, were you working patrol that day?
Yes.
Okay. And can you tell us what happened? Did you get a call? Did you end up going to the state's place?
There was radio traffic. I don't know exactly verbatim what the radio traffic was that came through our dispatch channel. That said there was an officer in trouble, and I believe it said officer involved shooting, but there was no more information than that.
And what did you do?
Of course, I responded to that address in order to assist in any way that I could.
And did you go with lights and sirens?
Yes.
Okay. What happened when you got to the address?
It was a chaotic scene. There were a lot of other cars there. So I parked my car and activated my body-worn camera and began trying to locate the scene in order to do some, to assist.
Okay, now, was that Your understanding the scene then was at 3996 Estates Place?
That's correct.
Okay. And so were you able to park in front of the house, or where did you park?
I parked in the street. I don't know exactly how far from that address, and I had never gotten a call on that street before, so I didn't exactly know where that address was. I just ran to where the other officers were running.
Okay. Now, this area is in your jurisdiction, is that correct?
No.
It isn't, okay. But do you make runs over into that area at times?
That street no.
Okay, all right. So when you got there, you start approaching the scene, tell us who you saw or what happened next.
So after I activated my body-worn camera, I saw only two officers that I already knew. So I ran up and began to take caution because of the nature of the call, to where I saw one Clinton Township officer that I knew, and then another that I knew, and I ran up with one of them to the front of what I believed to be the house.
Okay. Now, when you say activated the body-worn camera, that's right when you got out of the cruiser?
Yes.
Okay, and explain to ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what is a body-worn camera?
So a body-worn camera is a audio and video recording device that you wear on your person in your duties as a police officer if you are issued one, which I was. And it captures anything that might be going on around you while you have it activated.
So when you saw the officer, do you remember which officer you saw first that you recognized?
I remember recognizing Officer Bales first, and then Officer Phillips.
Okay. So tell us after, when you saw Bales, where did you go? What? Had you made it to the house yet?
Not the house where, yeah, no,
Or the 3996 Estates?
no.
Okay, so what did you do?
So I saw him taking precautions, so I saw Officer Bales taking precautions, and I did the same until I saw others running even further forward, which is where I followed Officer Phillips.
Okay. And where did you go? Where did Officer Phillips go?
To the front of the house.
Now, was Officer Phillips in uniform?
I don't recall.
Okay. Did you go to the front of the house? Where did you end up at the front of the house?
Eventually, I believe I made my way onto the porch somehow, trying to find somewhere to help.
Okay, and that's the porch of 3996 Estates, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall what took place up on the porch?
At the time, I was really just waiting for some sort of direction from Officer Phillips, who, I knew as a more experienced officer, so I just was kind of following everyone else's theirs lead, since it was the first officer-involved shooting I had been to and a pretty chaotic scene.
And the entire time, your body camera is still running, is that correct?
Yes.
Still operating, capturing video and audio.
Yes.
What happened after that? Do you recall? Or did you see other people up on the porch?
There were other people around me.
Did you know who they were?
No.
The defendant, Mr. Meade, did you know him?
No.
Okay. Had you ever worked with him or knew who he was at that time?
No.
So what do you recall happening next?
I recall there after a short bit, some people went around to the side of the house, maybe.
Okay, so did you go to the side? Did you run around the side, off the porch around the side of the house?
Eventually, I did. Someone handed me a gun belt,
And what did you do with that gun belt?
I asked where to put it, and somebody said to put it in one of the unmarked police trucks.
Okay, and did you, when you say police trucks, what are you talking about? Describe that for me.
I believe they were gray in color. I don't remember the make, but they were full-size pickup trucks.
And how did you know that that was a law enforcement truck?
Well, based on being pointed to them by a officer in uniform and the location of the vehicle, I don't remember if there were lights, but I know there was no like markings or anything on the side.
Okay. What did you do after that?
I put the belt in the truck of the open door and then closed the door and walked back towards the house to try to find some other way to help.
Okay. Did you make sure that nobody, civilians or whatever, were coming into the scene? What were you doing?
I don't know if it was around that time, but I remember people calling for medics and giving direction where the medics to go. But after the medics' arrival, I just began doing scene security the best I could, trying to figure out who's in charge.
Okay. And at that time, did you feel your role was done, and did you leave?
There was a dog that was running around, and after that was secured, and I asked a few people if they needed help, and they said no. And not knowing whose scene it was, I asked as many people as I could, and then went back to my cruiser to do outer scene security.
And needless to say, there was a lot of family members there, or civilians or whatever, and they were upset.
One could say that.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
I'm going to hand you what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 9. It's an envelope. Inside the envelope is a thumb drive. It's also marked State's Exhibit number 9. Did you have an opportunity to review that?
Yes.
And what is that?
That's my whole body-worn camera and what it captured,
Okay.
to the best of my knowledge.
So when you got back to your cruiser, you turned it off at some point, correct?
I turned it off after essentially leaving all the inner part of the scene and going all the way back to my cruiser after the chaos died down a little.
Is that a fair and accurate copy of your body-worn camera as to what it captured and depicted on that day that you were there?
Yes, to the best of my knowledge.
And you looked at it, and it does appear to be your body-worn camera, and it was yours.
It does appear so, yes.
And so that fairly accurately depicts what you saw that day as well, correct?
The camera's going to capture more than what my memory or what I'm able to digest.
Sure. But it also captures what you actually saw and remembered, correct?
I remember more after watching the body camera.
Right.
If
But
that's the question.
Yeah, the camera actually accurately and fairly depicts what you would have been able to see that day. And
Kinda-
more, correct?
And more, correct, yes.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Any cross-examination?
Yes, sir.
Good morning, Officer Penny.
Morning.
You previously told us about your experience as a law enforcement officer, but you also have significant experience as a military officer too, don't you?
I'm not an officer in the military, but I am enlisted, and I've been in for a little over 8 years.
What branch?
Army National Guard.
Isn't it true you just got back from deployment?
Oh, that's true, sir.
In Syria, right?
Yes.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
I want to talk to you about the other important job in your life, and that is being an officer with Minerva Park. You previously had given some testimony to Mr. Schroyer about the events of December the 4th. And I think that at least on 2 occasions, you described the scene as very chaotic, right?
Yes,
And it was your first officer-involved shooting that you'd ever participated in, right? Providing cover or security, right?
yes,
And so when you came down Estates Place, I think that was the first time you'd ever been on that road. Isn't it true that you saw a number of officers both in the street and in the yards around the houses on Estates Place?
that's correct.
And there were a lot more coming, right? There were a lot of sirens in the air, right?
Yes,
And the officers that you saw that were either in the street or in the yards, most of them had weapons drawn, didn't they?
that's correct.
And did you have your weapon drawn when you were responding?
Yes,
And when you said on direct examination that you and some of the officers were taking precautions, is that what you meant by drawing your weapon?
yes, and then, trying not to immediately run to where we believe the scene would be, up to the door, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So if there was still an ongoing, because again, we didn't have a lot of information, if there was still something ongoing, still a threat, then we wouldn't want to just run into it, but run up to it, if that makes sense.
That way you could react to a threat if it presented itself.
That's correct.
But your weapon was drawn, and most other officers had weapons drawn as well, right?
Correct.
And I think you said there were a number of police cars both parked on the street or in the middle of the street on Estates Place, right?
Yes,
Now, when you engaged your body-worn camera, is that worn here on the front of your uniform?
yes,
And to engage that, is there a button that you push to play that particular camera?
yes, at that time, there was we were wearing, I believe, Axon, and you just double tap the center after you activate it, and it will start recording audio and video.
What I would like to do is I would like to play at least a portion of your footage that you captured on your body-worn camera on December 4th, 2020 for you. And I believe your testimony was that you previously reviewed that, right?
Yes,
And that film or the footage that you captured refreshed your recollection on a lot of the events that day, right?
that's correct.
So if I could ask Courtney for your help and Ms. Stevens' help as well. Okay, we're going to start at the beginning of this body-worn camera. Officer Penny, and I assume that's your hand with the weapon in it?
That's correct.
So what I would ask you to do is run it to the 8-second mark, if you could, Ms. Stevens.
What do you got? Yeah, I got it.
This person right here, who is that?
I believe that's the back of Officer Phillips.
Barry Phillips.
Yes.
Is he Franklin Township officer that you previously identified, that you knew?
I know him as a Clinton Township officer.
So if you could run it 3 more seconds, to the 11-second.
We need medics come up.
So someone on the porch says, we need medics to come up, right?
That's correct.
And did you know who said that?
I did not at the time.
Do you now know who said it?
If we could play it again.
What do you got?
The house is clear.
Yeah, I got it.
They're getting the basement finished right now. And then we need medics come up.
Medics!
I believe that would be the defendant saying that.
Mr. Meade?
Yes.
Objection. If he knows.
As I understand your testimony, you didn't know Mr. Meade that day, right?
No,
But you subsequently know that Mr. Meade is charged in this case?
I do know that now, yes.
So if we could go, continue to the 19-second mark, please.
Why do you not shoot him?
I missed the call.
Did you hear Officer Phillips say, I missed the call?
Can we play it again?
Big Max, come on. Max!
Why did y'all shoot him?
I missed the call. It's okay.
Yes.
Hear that?
Yes.
That was Officer Phillips saying I missed the call, right?
Correct.
It's pretty difficult to hear, but you did hear, it, right?
That's correct.
All right, so if we can continue on to the 22-second mark. And the person that Mr. Phillips is speaking to is Jason Meade, isn't that true?
I know that now. That's correct.
You didn't know that then, but you know that now, right? All right. So if you could continue to the 28-second mark, please, Ms. Stevens.
Okay. No shots fired.
He didn't do nothing.
Ma'am?
So at the 28-second mark, then Mr. Meade comes off the front porch and starts dealing with civilians that are in the front yard, right?
Yes.
And he says, ma'am, he's being respectful to the people, and he disappears from the footage.
Objection to his characterization.
He says, ma'am, right?
Overruled.
He does say ma'am, yes.
And he's out of the frame for 10 seconds. So run it to the 38-second mark, please.
Ma'am, you need to wait. No shots fired. No. They're saying it is their nephew.
So Mr. Meade comes back at the 38-second mark, and again is speaking to Mr. Phillips, right? This person here.
That's correct.
And if you could continue on to the 41-second mark.
He came out the street, gun in his
Did you hear? Go back about 37 seconds.
No shots fired. They're saying it is their nephew. He came.
So Mr. Meade then tells Mr. Phillips that they, being the civilians, are telling him that it's their nephew that was shot, right?
That appears to be what he's saying, correct.
So if you could continue on to the 54-second mark.
Street, gun in his hand, going to the side door, going in with a gun. You guys were pulling out? Yes, as I was pulling up. Yeah, Julie asked for us to go. Who's in charge?
Stop right there. So Mr. Meade tells Mr. Phillips that the person that was shot was coming out of a car with a gun in his hand going to the back door, right? You heard that.
I did, yes.
Objection. I said back door.
You guys want to?
I think that we had just played, are you ready, Jill? I'm sorry. I think we had just played the clip of Mr. Meade's explanation to Terry Phillips. And isn't it true, Officer Penny, that Mr. Phillips didn't ask Mr. Meade why he shot the individual?
I don't think I heard that. Could we play it again?
Absolutely. Think back to the 41-second mark.
You need to wait. No shots fired. They're saying it is their nephew. He came out the street, gun in his hand, going to the side door, going in with a gun.
As you guys were pulling out?
Yes, as I was pulling up.
Yeah,
The answer to the question is whether Mr. Phillips asked Mr. Meade why he shot the person.
He didn't ask that.
Okay. And if we could continue to the 54-second mark.
first to go.
Doing this, who's in charge here?
I was one that was on the scene. I was one that was initiated.
And Mr. Meade's now talking with another officer, isn't he?
That appears, it's kind of early to say. I'm trying to,
Continue on to 58 seconds.
Will you have a supervisor with you?
Yeah, as soon as it's clear, we'll have contact.
I was distracted if you could go back.
I'm sorry. Sorry.
Did you hear if he was speaking to another officer?
that's correct.
And that other officer was asking him about whether a supervisor was on scene, wasn't he?
I have to hear that part again. All I remember is that he was speaking to somebody on the front yard.
Back 10 seconds if you witnessed, Stevens.
Charge here.
I was one that was on the scene. I was one that was initiated.
Okay, so will you have a supervisor with you?
Yeah, as soon as it's clear, we'll have contact.
Heard the other officer asking if the supervisor was on scene?
That's correct.
And Mr. Meade says as soon as it's secure, right?
That's correct.
So if we could continue on to the 1:05 mark.
What do we have inside? Just one down?
And go a little bit further, Ms. Stevens.
The aspect is clear because we got the medics ready.
So Mr. Meade reaches to his radio and radios something about a medic, right?
Something about a medic, correct.
Says something about getting the medics running, right?
Correct.
You could continue on to the 1:15 mark, Ms. Stevens.
What's up? As soon as I get the all clear, you guys come in. Hey.
So Mr. Meade is saying something about, as soon as I get the all clear, you guys can come up, right?
That's correct.
And he's speaking to the medics at this point, right?
I can't see who he's speaking to.
But it's logical that medics don't come in an unsecured scene, do they?
That's correct.
They want it to be secure, right?
Correct.
And medics were being summoned to the scene, weren't they?
I had heard earlier in the video that somebody had called for them. That's correct.
You could continue on to 1:24, Ms. Stevens.
Probably gonna be better off going to the side door. No, side door. Hey, I'm sending medics to the side door. Side.
So Mr. Meade is directing someone to go to the side door. That person or those people are not on the footage, but then he yells inside the house that he's sending the medics to the side door, right?
He's notifying the people inside that he's sending medics to the side door.
All right, so if we could go to the 1:28 mark, please.
Who's gun bell? It's one of the morphers.
And so you testified about this on direct examination that someone's gun belt was found on the sidewalk, right?
Correct.
And that's the gun belt that you're referencing, right?
That's correct.
And this person is bending over to pick it up. That's Terry Phillips, isn't it?
I believe so.
You could continue on to the 1:32 mark. It looks like Mr. Phillips is handing you the gun belt, right?
That's correct.
And then you said that you were directed as to where to put it, and it was in a gray pickup truck, right?
Not to the best of my knowledge, that's correct.
So in the span of 1:32, a lot's happening in this video, right?
There are a lot of things going on.
And you said it's a chaotic situation, right?
Yes,
Mr. Meade's speaking to a number of different officers, right?
correct.
He's speaking to medics too, right?
Correct.
And you witnessed it all, those 92 seconds, right?
My body camera captured more than I was able to at the time, but I was present during those things happening. That's correct.
So if we could go to the 2-minute mark of this video.
31 on the state plate.
That would be the defendant, Jason Meade. Jason Meade, yes.
Hey, where you guys at? This truck?
Move back just a bit. Do you see this pickup truck right here?
I do see that.
And did you see the flashing lights on the pickup truck?
I don't see them.
Where you guys at? This truck?
The pursuit lights, right?
I don't know what would categorize them as pursuit lights, but I would say that they're an emergency light indicative of police work. There's a blue light involved, red light.
That would signify that's a law enforcement vehicle, right?
Correct.
Your training would make you clearly conclude that, right?
Correct.
Have a moment, Your Honor.
Right?
No further questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Can you redirect?
I have no further questions. Thank you very much, officer.
Step down and just leave everything on the counter.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Or on the stand. Any further witnesses on behalf of the defense?
Yes.
Or on behalf of the state, I'm sorry.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Ready, sir?
No, this works. Why do I have the live stream on me?
Is that your run sheet?
I got it. Thank you. All right, thank you, sir.
A little maze around here. Can you raise your right hand? You solemnly swear, or affirm under penalty of perjury, your testimony in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth? Have a seat. Hold yourself up close to the microphone. And you may inquire.
Sir, would you please state and spell your name?
Nicholas Leidheiser, Nicholas Leidheiser.
Thank you. How are you employed?
I am a full-time employee with the Columbus Division of Fire as a firefighter paramedic.
And were you employed as a firefighter paramedic back in December of 2020?
I was.
And can you tell us a little bit about the education and training that you have that allows you to be a firefighter paramedic?
Sure. I went to fire school, basic 240 fire school, followed by EMT school and paramedic school, nationally registered as a paramedic and a EMT with the state of Ohio. And then I went through a fire academy with the Columbus Division of Fire, going back through that training, which is standard for working for Columbus.
Now, it sounds like some of that training, did that come after when you were a firefighter paramedic with Clinton Township?
Columbus's fire academy came after my employment with Clinton Township.
But you had the requisite training, though, to be a paramedic at Clinton Township, of course, too.
I did.
And is there a certification that goes along with that?
The NREMT certification as a paramedic.
And as a paramedic, what does that allow you to do in your role as a firefighter paramedic?
That allows me to act under a protocol written by a physician, and we have our protocols that we follow throughout delivering EMS care.
Protocol being that when you respond to a scene and you're directed to someone who's potentially in need of medical aid, you can assess the situation and, following the physician protocol you've described, decide what to do with that individual?
Yes,
But that's a little bit different than a treating physician, right?
absolutely.
But you are able to assess injuries of a person and decide what steps need to be taken before they can get to somewhere where they can see a doctor.
Yes,
On December 4th of 2020, were you dispatched to 3996 Estate Place here in Columbus, Franklin County, Ohio?
yes.
And what kind of call was that?
We were dispatched on a shooting.
And were you the driver that day?
I was.
So you were driving an ambulance to that scene?
Yes.
And before we get into the details of what you remember that day, I noticed you had some documents in your hand when you went up to the witness stand. You can just explain to the jurors what you carried up there?
Yes. I carried up the run sheet, the patient care report from that incident, and then also my witness statement from the Columbus Division of Police that was taken 3 days after the incident.
Did you bring those documents up just in case you needed to refresh your recollection about any of the details of the incident?
Yes.
Thank you. Did you arrive at approximately 12:17 at Estates Place that day?
Yes.
And to be clear, that's 12:17 p.m., correct?
Correct.
So when you first got to the area of 3996 Estates Place, what did you do?
We initially chose to stage based on the active scene that we encountered when we arrived. This staging lasted very briefly. Somebody came running down the street to us holding a child who we believed to potentially be one of the shooting victims. We quickly, after a quick assessment, realized that neither of these people were in need of medical care.
What about the child or the man running caused you to believe that they may need medical care?
How they were coming towards us from an EMS standpoint, they were coming towards the medic, so we didn't have much information as to what we were dispatched, what victims or patients we were dispatched for. So for these people to come towards us, we thought that they may be in need of medical assistance.
Do you recall the man's demeanor?
I do. He was shaken up.
Do you need a break? No, that's all right. Do you need a break? Well, do you need a bottle of water or anything?
No, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, if you need a break, we can take a break whenever.
Sir, and in these initial moments after arriving in the area of 3996 Estates Place, you mentioned that you had made a decision to stage. Is that contrasting what dispatch had indicated you could do when you got to the scene?
Yes.
Would you please explain a little bit further what you mean by that?
Sure. So when we're dispatched to violent incidents, for example, a shooting or a stabbing, per our systems manual, we are required to stage on these runs until police have arrived on the scene and deemed them safe for us to enter. The FAO stated that somebody on the scene had stated that it was safe for us to enter. On the street that we were dispatched to, we had to park relatively far back because of the large police presence, and we encountered several officers still running into the scene with weapons drawn. And my partner, who was in charge of the run, inquired with the FAO on the radio of what we were encountering, and the EMS supervisor made the decision for us to just let's hold on until we get further direction due to the active nature of the scene.
And during the time that you were waiting for any next steps that needed to be taken, you and your crew were with the man who had come up to the EMS with the child?
Yes.
And I believe you had mentioned you were able to clear them because they were not the subject of a shooting or any serious injury, right?
Yes.
And you said the man was upset. Do you recall him saying anything?
Action. Sustained.
Eventually, did you receive further information about what to do next at the scene?
Yes, we eventually were approached by an officer who was able to direct us into the scene.
And what was that? Residence?
Yes,
I mean, that's the residence at 3996 Estates Place, right?
I believe so.
So where did you go at that residence to figure out what to do?
Like I said, we were directed to a house, and we were directed inside the house by an officer.
Do you recall particularly where in the house?
Yes.
Where?
We were directed in a side door into what I believe to be a kitchen.
Do the records generated in connection with your run to this scene document when exactly you finally had contact with the subject of this call?
Yes.
And sir, what are you referencing there?
The patient care report?
From the run sheet that you brought up to refresh your memory?
Yes.
And how is that data generated regarding the time that you made contact with the subject of the call?
The app patient time is an approximate time. It is a best estimate of when us as medics arrive to a patient.
And you provided that information then?
I did not. The author of this report provided that information.
But you were able to review that, and that fairly and accurately reflects your memory of it.
Yes.
So what time does it say, best estimate, of course, as you indicated, that you had contact with the patient?
12:22 p.m.
And when you made contact with that individual, can you describe what exactly you saw with the injuries, where they were, et cetera?
Sure. We made contact with the patient who was laying on the floor, supine, facing upwards. I went to the head of the patient to initiate a rapid trauma assessment, and we noted that he had multiple GSWs to his chest area, which was what we noticed while we were inside the house.
Now, supine, that means on his back, right?
Yes, sir.
So he's laying on his back on the floor in the house, looking up.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned there were multiple gunshot wounds that you saw on him, and you said it was on the front that you saw?
Yes.
Eventually, in assessing the patient on that day, did you have a chance to look and see whether there were wounds to his back?
Yes.
And can you tell us what you saw there?
Also appeared to be multiple GSWs to the patient's back.
Did you see blood in the area?
Yes.
How much?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I can't give you an exact answer on like a definitive amount of blood that was seen.
In your role as a paramedic, do you have the training or the obligation to determine the like entrance and exit and those sort of details about any particular gunshot wound?
No.
Now, you mentioned that once making contact with this person, you began treatment. Can you, and you were describing a rapid trauma assessment. Can you tell us about the steps you took and what decision was made with regard to this person?
Initially?
Yes.
So with that comes a rapid trauma assessment. What we're assessing is injuries potentially to be unsustainable with life. So starting at the head, we're looking for any potential GSWs to the patient's head to see if there's any brain matter exposed. That with the absence of a pulse or any breathing would constitute us to pronounce the patient deceased at that time. So we will start our assessment there and work our way forward. So without the presence of any of those things, we determined that the patient was going to be transported to the hospital with life-saving measures initiated.
Okay, so to be clear, it sounds like in your assessment, you noted that there were no gunshot wounds to the head, an absence of pulse, and putting those things together per your protocol, they would still be transported.
Yes.
Now, prior to removing, and I guess I should ask too, was this person identified as Casey Goodson Jr.?
At the time, no.
Okay.
Like
later-
in that moment, no.
But ultimately, once you completed the call, taking this individual to the hospital, was that determination made?
Yes.
Thank you. Let's talk about the process. So you've done the assessment, and you need to take this person to the hospital. So there were some things that you did, right, to do that? Can you tell the jurors what happened?
Can you repeat that question?
You made a determination to take Mr. Goodson to the hospital, right?
Right.
Before doing that and removing him from the scene, what did you do?
So we were obviously in the house making a rapid trauma assessment. I was knelt behind the patient's head, looking at the patient's head, and determining if this patient was going to be viable for transport to the hospital. We determined that he was, and we initiated CPR, which CPD was doing CPR as we entered. We reinitiated CPR, and then we're able to get the patient onto a tarp, which is just something that we can use to carry the patient out, any patient that's unable to walk, to our cot. And we placed the patient on the cot and then took it through the yard and placed it into the back of the ambulance.
Okay, thank you. One moment, Your Honor.
You may.
Thank you. May I approach?
You may.
Sir, I'm handing you what's been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 8C and 8C. Sir, did you have an opportunity to review those exhibits?
Yes.
Are they photographs?
Yep,
Do you recognize the scene depicted in those photographs?
I do.
What do you recognize that scene to be?
The scene of this shooting.
Okay, and do those pictures fairly and accurately reflect what you saw that day as you tended to Mr. Goodson?
Yes.
So, Your Honor, may I publish?
You may.
Thank you. First, I'm going to show 8C.
Do you want to approach?
Next. Sorry, sir. Okay, so again, displaying 8C. Okay. So, sir, when you had contact with Mr. Goodson that afternoon, was he wearing things on his head, face, etc.?
Yes.
What was that?
It appeared to be some sort of hat and 2 ear pods,
Earpods or AirPods?
headphones.
Headphones, in-ear headphones?
Yes, sir.
And as part of your treatment protocol, did you do something with those items?
Yes.
What did you do with them?
So as I was standing or knelt behind the patient's head initiating that rapid trauma assessment, I removed the patient's hat and headphones, in-ear headphones.
And did you do anything with those items after removing them?
No.
Okay. And can you just identify the skull cap and the headphones in this exhibit, please? I think you should be able to touch the screen with your finger and circle.
I have a
Perhaps not.
blank screen.
Oh, sure. That'll work too. Thank you. Sir? Here's a purple laser pointer.
Thank you. And when you say identify,
Just show us where the skull cap and earbuds you're describing.
skull cap, earbud.
Is your laser work?
Why don't you use this one?
Thank you. Yes, sir. The purple one just doesn't seem to show up. It looked a little brighter. All right, let's try that.
Skull cap and AirPod or earbud.
Thank you. And briefly, let's have a look at Exhibit 8CC. Reflection on this one is a little. Okay, I think that's about the best we'll get with the lighting. And then again, are you able to tell us where the skull cap and the earbuds are?
Yes. His skull cap is right here, and then obviously an earbud right there.
Thank you. We're finished with that. Thank you, sir. So, did you have to do anything with Mr. Goodson's clothing prior to taking him to the hospital?
Yes.
Can you please explain to the jurors what you mean by that?
Yes. During transport, a secondary trauma assessment was performed, and what that entails is removing all of the patient's clothing to identify any traumatic injuries so that we can, A, treat those injuries, make sure that we are stopping the bleeding from any of those injuries and all of those injuries, as well as make sure that we have a clear idea of all the injuries that the patient has, so that when we inform the hospital that we're coming and what we're coming with, we're able to make sure that they are fully aware of what we're bringing so they can be fully ready for us when we get there.
And you followed that process with Mr. Goodson of removing his clothing that day prior to transport?
Yes.
And so what did you do? Do you have to cut the clothing off?
Yes.
So did you notice anything as you were removing Mr. Goodson's clothing prior to transport?
What do you mean?
Well, as you were removing his clothes, was there anything that you saw that caught your interest?
Yes.
Would you please explain?
Sure. As we were removing the patient's clothing, we noticed that he had a concealed holster right in the center, midline of his pants. We went ahead and cut around that as to not disturb any evidence.
And can you describe do you remember the makeup of the holster?
I do not.
Okay. And you said you did not cut the holster because you thought that might be significant?
Yes, which is standard practice in with all shooting patients.
And in particular, when you arrived to treat Mr. Goodson, did a law enforcement officer notify you that there was a handgun proximate to Mr. Goodson's body?
Yes.
And can you tell us a little bit more about that?
As we entered the residence, one of the officers made us aware that there was a firearm on the ground next to the patient, just making us aware from a scene safety standpoint.
Where exactly do you remember seeing the firearm?
To the left of the patient,
Now, is that from your perspective or the patient's perspective?
the patient's perspective.
Okay, so Mr. Goodson's left as he lay there face up on the ground.
Yes.
Did you touch the gun at all as you and your colleagues worked on Mr. Goodson?
No.
Did you see anyone else do anything to the gun?
No.
After Mr. Goodson's clothes were removed, you then took him to the ambulance to take him to the hospital?
We removed Mr. Goodson's clothes during transport in the back of the ambulance.
Thank you for clarifying. And where did you take him?
Riverside Methodist Hospital.
What did you do once you arrived at the hospital?
We took the patient into Trauma Bay 2 as directed by the hospital staff and gave them a bedside report of what we have and what we have done with the patient for a swift handoff of patient care. And we also, with the patient, stays all of his belongings, all of his clothing, that's all brought in as well and given to hospital staff and security.
And that process was followed with respect to Mr. Goodson that day. All his property that he had on his person was collected and turned over to, you said, the hospital security?
Hospital, whether it's nurses or security, yes.
Okay, thank you. Sir, at any time that you had contact with Mr. Goodson, did you or your team of paramedics detect a pulse?
No.
And when you made contact with Mr. Goodson, were his hands secured in any way by, by law enforcement?
He was handcuffed.
Thank you so much, sir. That's all I have.
Any cross-examination?
Mr. Lyda, how are you?
Good. How are you, sir?
I'm Steve Nolder. I'm one of Mr. Meade's lawyers. And you said that Mr. Goodson was handcuffed when you encountered him, right?
Yes.
That you weren't responsible for that, right?
No.
And I think you also said that right next to where Mr. Goodson's body was laying, there was a gun, right?
Yes.
And so that's not unusual for a person to be handcuffed when they're laying right next to a gun if their life is not known, right?
Sure.
Safe, isn't it? And matter of fact, when you were staged, before you went into the 3996 States Place, isn't it true that you put a bulletproof vest on?
Yes.
And that bulletproof vest would have identified you as a medic, right?
Yes.
It would have also given you protection if the scene wasn't safe, right?
Yes.
And you were notified that the scene was safe, but that precaution gave you a little extra comfort, right?
Yes.
And you were working that day with Mr. Kohler. He was your partner that day, right?
Yes.
I think that you guys were at lunch when the call came in.
I don't recall.
You got there quickly though, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah, I approached the witness, Your Honor.
You may.
Hey, approach, Your Honor.
You may.
Mr. Lighthizer, I'm going to hand you what's been marked for identification purposes as Exhibits Q through U. And I ask you to take a look at those and tell me when you're finished, and I'll ask you a couple of questions.
I'm finished.
You have a protest?
You may.
Go ahead, guys. After examining defense exhibits Q through U, you recognize the clothing that's depicted in those photographs.
I do.
And what would that clothing be? Is that the clothing that you cut off Mr. Goodson?
I do not recall.
So you recall the clothing, but you don't recall the source?
In fact, I do not recall the clothing.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
You may.
No further questions.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
All right, you can, you're good to go. Take your paperwork with you.
Thank you.
May want to grab the, any further witnesses on behalf of the state?
Yes, Your Honor.
Everyone doing okay? You can come on up. A little maze around here. You raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury your testimony in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do, sir.
Have a seat. Pull yourself up close to the microphone. You may inquire.
Sir, please state your name and spell it.
My name is Dana Avery Kroom, D-A-N-A, A-V-E-R-Y, Kroom, C-R-O-O-M.
How are you employed?
Right now, I'm employed for Franklin County Prosecutor's Office as an investigator.
And then prior to joining the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office, did you work for the Columbus Police Department?
That's correct. I worked 33 and a half years for the Columbus Police Department.
What positions did you hold there?
My first 4 years, I worked patrol, routine patrol car. For 12 years, I worked narcotics. And my last 17 years, I worked homicide.
And were you working in the homicide unit on December 4th of 2020?
That's correct. I was assigned, I was actually in cold case, but there's a unit called CERT, Critical Incident Response Team, and I was assigned to the Critical Incident Response Team.
And what was the job of the Critical Incident Response Team?
We investigate all critical incident responses involving police officers, whether it be the use of a firearm, death in custody, or any situation like that.
And so were you dispatched to 3996 Estates Place on December 4th, 2020, around 1:15 p.m.?
That's correct. My partner, Detective Gillette, informed me there's a police-involved shooting at that location.
And did that call out eventually lead you later that afternoon to Riverside Methodist Hospital?
That's correct. I first showed up at the scene. I interviewed several firefighters, and then I was asked by my sergeant to go to Riverside Hospital to do what we call a hospital follow-up.
And why were you doing a hospital follow-up at Riverside Methodist?
Why was I?
Yeah, what were you going there to do?
Oh, to do The hospital follow-up, typically, the person that was shot, we would go, talk to the doctors, observe the victim, and if any witnesses, a lot of times the witnesses show up at the hospital, we would interview the witnesses that were at the hospital, and sometimes firefighters that were at the hospital.
And the subject of this incident was Casey Goodson Jr.?
That's correct.
So you went to the hospital, and again, this is later that afternoon on December 4th of 2020?
That's correct.
And were you directed to actually make contact with Mr. Goodson's body?
That's what we do at a hospital follow-up. Nobody has to tell us. That's a routine we do.
Okay. And when you made contact there in the room of Mr. Goodson, were you directed to collect his property?
So in this case, security officer had his property. I took the property from the security officer.
And are you familiar with the hospital's process for collecting property and gathering that up and providing that to you in these sorts of cases?
Yes, and a lot of times, sometimes the property we get directly from the patrol officer that responded. And sometimes we get it from the nurse, and then sometimes we get it from the security officer.
And in this case, you said it was the security officer?
In this case, it was the security officer, yes.
And it was identified as in Mr. Goodson's property, correct?
That's correct.
And after collecting that property, what did you do with it?
After collecting the property, we take it to the Columbus Police property room.
And once arriving at the property room, what did you do with it?
And we do an inventory of the property, and then we turn it in, and it gets assigned a number.
When you do the inventory, do you document what exactly you're looking at, so you have an opportunity to review the items and see them to make that list?
That's correct, we do.
Did you follow that process in this case?
Yes, we did.
And was a tag number assigned to identify the property that you collected from Mr. Goodson?
That's correct.
And if you were to see a tag number, would you be able to associate that with the property collected in this case?
That's correct.
Thank you. Sir, there's some gloves over there on the desk. We're probably going to need those. Stuff here.
Once again, we would stipulate that everything the detective crew got from the scene was turned over, and we're not challenging any of that stuff.
You guys want to approach? It is your duty not to form or express an opinion on the case until it's finally submitted to you.
All rise.
If you can sit down, about 10 minutes. Prosecutors now?
Yes, sir.
Quite a bit. No, that's what Megan did yesterday. Victory. We have everyone here. Is this witness going to go into this afternoon?
Shouldn't. I mean, we have 10 items marked, which should be pretty.
On the, what? Oh, no, Faith, who did it? This is all Faith stuff. What? No, no. So far, both witnesses. Everyone can have a seat. And Detective Perlman, you're still under oath.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I inquire?
You may.
Mr. Kroom, before we left for the break, we were about to talk about an item that I was going to show you. So let me go over that. I see you have gloves. Thank you for that. Sir, have you seen this box before?
Yes.
And then are there identifying marks that allow you to associate this box with a particular case?
The main one is property number, CPD's property number.
Okay, is that the property number for this case involving the shooting of Casey Goodson Jr.?
That's correct.
Thank you. And what do you understand to be in this box?
Evidence, I'm not, most of the evidence, clothes, holster, cell phone, multiple,
Okay.
and other items.
The items that you collected from Mr. Goodson back
Yes.
on December 4th, 2020?
Yes.
Okay.
You're gonna have to put it over here on the corner.
Okay, is that all right?
Yep.
Thank you, Judge.
Let me stand on it.
Whatever is comfortable. I'll
Mind
hand
if
it
I
to
stand?
you. So we're gonna look for what's been marked for identification purposes as 5A. Here we go. All right, so first I'm gonna hand you this bag. Do you mind if I scoot it over so I can move it? Thank you. So this has been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 5A.
Okay. Can I open?
Yes. Can you see what's in that bag, sir?
Looks like a sweatshirt or shirt or clothing.
Okay, do you mind pulling it out and showing it to the jury?
Oh, yeah.
All right, so yes, you said this appears to be a sweatshirt.
Yes.
And is this an item you recovered from Mr. Goodson?
Yes.
Thank you. Your Honor, may I approach the jury to show them the item? Thank you, sir. Right in front of me, thank you. This is 5B. It's been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 5B. Would you please open that container and talk about those items? Let me help you there. What is this, sir?
Looks like underwears.
Okay. All right, are there other items in that bag?
Yes.
Is that the last one in there?
No. And this is just part of the belt right here.
Thank you. And then the socks.
Yes.
Thank you. We can put those back. So that bag been marked as for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 5C. What's the reason for
Buttons, coats.
the shorts? Yes, sir. identification purposes is State's Exhibit 5B. And a t-shirt.
Yes.
Here's that. Thank you. Here is 5E.
Chase credit card.
Is there a name on it?
Yeah. Sharon Payne.
Thank you. Now 5F. What is this item?
It's like an iPhone, black iPhone.
Looks like there was a note that was attached to it. It's like a detective's note.
Yeah, I'm not sure who, it's not from me.
Okay. But other than the note, this item's in the same or
Yes.
substantially similar condition as it was back on December 4th, 2020?
As far as I can remember, yes, sir.
Thank you. G? Huh? 5G. Thank you.
And you don't care about the evidence tape being?
No, please get it. Thank you. And you don't make sure the item's not. Please tell us what this item is.
A holster,
Okay.
gun for a
Holster
gun, for guns.
For a gun. Sir, does this holster have any sort of strap to restrain the weapon that would be put in it?
To restrain the weapon?
Yes.
No, it's a holster. This goes on the belt itself.
Okay.
And the gun just fits in right, just like that.
Okay, is there anything to secure the weapon other than the holster itself? Anything that would go over the top?
No, sir.
Okay. And what kind of gun would go in a holster such as that one?
Semi-auto, a small gun, even like a small 38
Handgun?
handgun, yes.
Thank you. Here. So now we're gonna go to 5H for this one. You'd be so kind to help me package that up. Thank you. Okay, 5H. Again, this is the exhibit, this is marked for identification purposes, is 5H. What's that?
5H is a wallet, black wallet with a concealed carry.
And actually, let's pull this concealed carry permit out because this one has its own sticker. Do you see that? Exhibit 5HH.
Yes,
And again, you said that's a concealed carry permit?
that is.
And who's it made out to?
Casey Goodson Jr.
And what is the issue date?
1/16 of 19.
And the expiration date?
1/16 of 2024.
Thank you.
driver's license.
For whom? Mr. Goodson?
Mr. Goodson, that's it.
Okay. And then there's other items in this wallet too, correct?
Yes.
And again, those other items would fall under State's Exhibit H, with just the CCW license being separately marked as 5HH, right?
Yes.
So let's just, we've got a commercial learner permit here,
Yes.
and that's in relation to a CDL.
Yes.
And then there's various credit cards that are in here, correct?
That's correct.
So this is a Chase card made out to Casey Goodson Jr.
That's correct.
The last 4 digits of 8207. And then a Visa debit, Casey Goodson 1414.
That's correct.
What's this item?
Looks like some type of work ID with the name Casey Goodson Jr. on it.
Thank you. Debit card?
Debit card, that's correct. There's no name.
What's
Oh.
the last 4 on that one?
Last 4 would be 8575.
Okay.
There's no name on the back here.
And what's that item, sir?
It's a debit card also, MasterCard, last 4, 1918, no name.
Thank you. There's a social security card in here. Who's that for?
Casey Goodson Jr., last 4, 3161.
Just give me 1 second. One more detail about the driver's license. I think we forgot to mention, is there something up at the top that says whether he has a commercial license?
That's correct.
Thank you. So that's a yes, it has
Yes.
a commercial license.
Yes, commercial license.
Then what's this?
Looks like a business card, Precise Dental Care from Dental's office.
Thank you. The handwritten phone number on the bottom?
Yes.
Okay. I believe that covers everything I want to cover in State's Exhibit 5H. We have State's Exhibit 5I. What's this?
Looks like it might be an AirPod holder,
Okay.
empty.
Just give me 1 moment. I believe that covers everything. Let me just double check. I'll get this box out of the way. You can have a seat, sir. Thank you so much for helping us review those items with the jury.
I got a trash can for you there.
All right, thank you, sir. So, sir, we, again, for the record, reviewed State's Exhibits 5A through 5I, and as well as 5HH. So having reviewed all those items with the jury and looked at them, are they all in the same or substantially similar condition as they were when you collected them from Mr. Goodson back on December 4th of 2020?
As far as I can remember.
Thank you. All right. That's all I have. Thank you.
Any cross-examination?
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Okay.
Good morning, Detective.
Good morning, sir.
We know each other. My name's Mark Collins, and along with Mr. Nolder and Ms. Stevens, who you know as well, correct?
Yes, sir.
We represent Jason in this action. It's a long line of people waiting to cross-examine you now that you're retired.
Oh.
Good to see you, sir.
See you too.
I apologize, semi-retired.
Semi-retired, yes, sir.
Detective Kroom, you mentioned to the prosecution on direct that you had used to work patrol, correct?
That's correct.
Narcotics, correct?
That's correct.
You undercover a bunch, correct?
Yes, sir.
And when you used to work patrol, if you saw someone waving a gun, that would be an offense, in a car, that would be an offense, correct?
That's correct.
And you had a duty to investigate and see what's going on, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And when you saw that person waving a gun, you would have no idea if the person had a CCW permit, correct?
That's correct. Back when I was on, there was no CCW permit.
Correct.
Yeah.
But even when you were in December of 2020, you were still homeless, you were.
Yes, yes.
If you saw someone waving a gun when you were a detective in December of 2020, you would have a duty to investigate.
All it in, yes.
And if someone was waving a gun, that's a felony offense, correct?
That's correct.
Jackson. What would be the objection?
It's not a felony offense.
It's not an improper handling?
We're not arguing that at council table.
May I proceed, Your Honor? Oh,
Not until Jill's ready. Now you may proceed.
thank you. Detective, that would be a criminal offense that you were observing, correct?
That's correct.
And you have an obligation to pursue and investigate, correct?
That's correct.
If you later saw that individual hypothetically out of a car running away from you after you identified yourself, you would still have a reason to investigate, correct?
That's correct.
And if that person had pointed the gun at you earlier, that's another criminal offense, correct?
That's correct.
And a person, you would agree with me, can be a threat if they're standing away from you and they have a gun, correct?
That's correct.
If their back is to you, they can still shoot you facing away from the other direction, correct?
That's correct.
And in all those situations, Detective, in that short time, you would have no idea if they had a social security card, correct?
That's correct.
No idea if they had a CCW card, correct?
That's correct.
No idea if they had a driver's license, correct?
That's correct.
No idea if any,
Slow it down.
no idea of any of the items that the prosecutor just showed you. You would have no idea of that at the time, correct?
That's correct.
Because you wouldn't find that out until after the fact, correct?
That's correct.
Kind of like an armchair quarterback. You find that out in hindsight, correct?
That's correct.
Overruled.
None of that information is available to you when you're assessing that situation, correct?
That's correct.
And none of that goes into your assessment of the different levels of threat at that time, correct?
That's correct.
The only thing that goes into your assessment is what you actually observe and the actions of the individual, correct?
That's correct.
Now, back in December of 2020, as a member of the CERT team, those are very experienced detectives, correct?
That's correct.
And one of the necessities, one of the first things that you guys do as a group is make sure interview anybody that was at the scene at the time of the incident, correct?
Yes.
Would you say those are the most important witnesses to interview as quickly as possible?
Yes.
And those witnesses were interviewed on December the 4th, correct?
Yes.
You also do a canvass of the neighborhood, correct?
Yes.
It's very important to you guys whether or not a neighbor hears something, correct?
Yes.
Sees something, correct?
Yes.
And again, those are done on December the 4th, 2020.
Yes.
And all of those interviews are then taken and given to the lead detective, in this case, Detective Hughes,
Yes.
of the CERT team, correct? There's different portions of the CERT team and what they do, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the goal is to provide that entire packet to the prosecution, correct?
That's correct.
And you don't know what's relevant or what's not, correct?
That's correct.
But if someone was at the scene and heard what happened, you would believe that that would be important that the prosecution would want to know, correct?
Yes.
If someone was at the scene as the incident was going and they heard and saw what happened, you would want that to go to the prosecution as well, correct?
Yes.
And all those are types of things that you, evidence that you would expect the prosecution to put forth, correct? You want the full picture.
Yes. We would give them the full picture.
Give them the full.
Basis?
Characterization, Your Honor.
Overruled. You would want to give them the whole picture,
That's correct.
the whole truth.
That's correct.
Now, on December the 4th, in this situation, you were actually part of the 13 plus CSSU, right? Because you were going to the hospital.
I was going to the hospital, yes, but not technically, that's part of our job, though, to pick up.
Part of your job,
Yeah,
correct? And you've been involved with CSSU many times, correct?
Correct.
Hundreds of times, correct?
Yes, sir.
And the purpose of the crime scene search unit is to identify things that the CERT team tells them to, correct?
That's correct.
They then mark them, right?
That's correct.
They then take pictures of them, right?
That's correct.
So in that situation, they mark, they stage, and they take pictures, right?
That's correct.
Because sometimes those things get mishandled, right?
Yes.
So if something gets mishandled or not turned in, there's a picture to back that up, correct?
Yes.
Doesn't mean someone's tampering with the scene or anything like that, correct?
That's correct.
You're trying to do the best you can in that situation.
That's correct.
And CSSU normally shows up hours later, correct?
That's correct.
And so in this situation, sir, you collected underwear on, correct?
That's correct.
Pair of shorts on, correct?
That's correct.
And then there were shorts over the, well, shorts, jeans, correct?
Yes.
A T-shirt
Yes.
and a hoodie.
Yes.
Okay, and all of those items, they had been cut up and things of that nature, and that's not uncommon in these situations, right?
Not uncommon. Surgeon at the hospital or the squad.
By squad, you mean the medics.
Medics, yes.
So those items have gone through a lot of different things, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, the holster you examined, there does not appear to be any blood on the holster, does there?
I don't remember. I didn't see. I don't remember. I didn't look that closely. If you want me to look again, I can. I don't remember, to be honest with you.
Okay. Do you know if the holster was tested for blood?
No, I don't know.
And have you ever, when you were undercover, have you ever worn a holster? Like that, undercover?
Yes.
And that holster actually, it doesn't have like, when the prosecution asks you about a clip, that's like out on patrol when you're walking the beat, there's a clip around your gun, correct?
That's correct. And I don't have one now on mine, so.
Right. You carry a holster, correct?
Yes.
And that type of holster goes on the inside, and the basis is the elasticity presses up against the person's body, correct?
Yes. And then sometimes it has I'm not sure this one, but sometimes it closes up a little bit by itself.
Right. And you've worn those when you're undercover, correct?
That's correct.
And you've worn those when you were trying to apprehend somebody, correct?
That's correct.
And those don't just fly out, do they, Detective?
Objection.
Have they ever flown out to you, sir?
Mine's never flew out. Oh,
Overruled.
Have they ever flown out when you were doing those things?
never flown out for me, no.
And how many times would you say you've done that, Detective?
Hundreds of times, yeah.
Anything else? Always a pleasure, Detective Kroom. Thank you.
Thank you.
Redirect?
Yes, Your Honor, one moment, please.
No problem.
Still gonna use 2A for. Make that all week.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I inquire? Thank you, Mr. Kroom. Just following up some of the matters that you discussed with Mr. Collins, he was discussing what you would do based on your training and experience as an officer when you see someone waving a gun. So I want to talk about that a little bit. I think you mentioned in your testimony that you would call it in, something along those lines?
So for me, I was now, as a homicide detective, I would call it in because I would be plain clothes. But if I was in uniform, I would react.
And would reacting be to call in to dispatch what you're doing at the time?
Yeah, call it in. I'll let everybody know in my precinct what's going on, yes.
Particularly if someone's waving a firearm, because a firearm's dangerous, correct?
That's correct.
So you would want to get that information out there so other officers could support you?
That's correct.
And Mr. Collins was asking about an officer's duty to investigate a situation, correct?
That's correct.
And an officer who sees something there at the scene has tools that are available to them back in 2020 that would allow them to get further information to assess the threat, correct?
Say it again, I'm sorry.
An officer in 2020, in December of 2020, would have tools available to them, particularly calling into dispatch and leads to get more information about a particular suspect, right?
You can call it in, yes, that's what we would normally do, we call it in and get more backup, get people there to help you.
And can you also call in to dispatch a license plate to get more information about the license plate?
That's correct.
And what information could you obtain through that process?
Leads as the owner of the vehicle, and it will tell you if you have a CCW permit.
And then that would help assess whether that person could have a firearm in a vehicle, correct?
That's correct.
And would the vehicle registration information also indicate the address of where that vehicle is registered?
Yes.
So that would also be pertinent to the officer too. Say, for instance, the vehicle goes to the address where it's registered.
That's correct.
Now, an officer in investigating and following up on a situation, it's their duty to observe all actions and all the facts and circumstances in front of them to assess a potential threat, correct?
Yes.
So when an officer sees something that would indicate that maybe the situation is less threatening, they should take that into account too.
Yes.
So if an officer sees some innocent or non-threatening conduct, how would that affect their assessment of the threat?
If it's a non-threat?
Yeah.
Oh, you scale down. You scale down.
So, for instance, you were asked about this hypothetical of an individual waving a gun. If that person were to exit their vehicle carrying a sandwich bag, how should that, based on training and experience, affect an officer's assessment of the potential threat?
He still had the gun in his hand, or no?
No, the gun was not visible. It's a hypothetical.
Overruled.
So if the guy had a sandwich bag in his hand?
Yes.
Oh, the threat would be lower.
And that would change the officer's actions that should be taken towards that individual.
That's correct. Yes.
And how would they change?
You would still investigate what was going on, see why he had the gun in the first place, just to make sure. But can I clear something up, though?
Yeah, please.
When you say, I would have that information, like, you don't get that information back quick. I mean, when you call it in, the lady has to choose it in. You probably wouldn't be getting that as you're chasing the individual. I don't know if that makes that clear. I want to make the jury understand that.
I appreciate that. Thank you for that information. What would be the average turnaround time then?
Depends. So the main purpose is to make sure the officer's that might not come out right away. If say you start chasing a guy and you know he's running out and you gave all that information, the main threat is to make sure the officer and make sure everything's secured first. And then that information will probably come after the situation.
But it's fair to say that, again, it's evolving circumstances, so whether the circumstances indicate the threat is getting greater or lesser, the officer should always react to that.
Yeah, depending on the threat level. That's correct.
Okay. Now, you had answered some questions regarding the holster that you showed the jury earlier.
That's correct.
Have you ever used that particular kind of holster?
Something similar. I don't know if it's the same exact one, but something similar.
But not the exact same model, right?
I can't tell you if it's the exact same one, no.
So you wouldn't be able to really comment on the functionality of that?
No, I couldn't. No, I'm not going to.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
May I?
You may.
Detective, when you're undercover, you don't have access to leads, correct?
That's correct.
And if you don't work for the Columbus Division of Police, you don't have access to the dispatch room, correct?
That's correct.
And if you're on a team, the first thing you should do, undercover team, is air what you see, correct?
That's correct.
You would air that to your team, right? So the team would respond as fastly as possible, correct?
That's correct.
And those are the people that you would want interviewed at the time, the team, to see what they heard, correct?
That's correct.
And if the person has a bag in their hand and they have a gun in another hand and they run, that person's an immediate threat, correct?
Oh, that's correct.
The highest threat there could be, correct?
Objection.
Hold on, Mark, slow it down, or Mr. Collins, slow it down a little bit. Overruled.
If the person had a bag in their hand and a gun in the other hand and they ran, that's the highest threat there is, correct?
High threat.
He overruled the objection.
Overruled.
correct?
Still a threat, a high threat.
Thank you very much, Detective.
That's correct.
All right, you can step down, leave everything up there. You can take the water. That's fine. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our lunch break. Do not discuss this case among yourselves. Do not permit anyone to discuss it with you or in your presence. It is your duty not to form or express an opinion on the case until it is finally submitted to you. We'll try and get started at 1:30, so if you can check in at 1:15.
All rise.
Trying to help you, Joe.